Welcome to the 12 Steps of Recovery in American Sign Language. I will be signing for a longtime member of Alcoholics Anonymous who is off camera to protect his anonymity. He will be taking you through the 12 Steps of Recovery using the book titled Alcoholics Anonymous, which AA members refer to as the Big Book. He wants to begin by saying this: every member of Alcoholics Anonymous has a slightly different way of presenting the 12 steps. I have never seen a way that worked for everyone, nor have I ever seen a way that didn't work for some. I do not represent all of AA. This is simply my way of presenting the 12 steps, and it has helped many. With the aid of this video and you being able to replay and study it, I hope it will help you become equipped to begin to sponsor others. You will, as time passes, make modifications to this presentation as you develop your own style. And that is just fine. So, get a book and we'll get started. On page 92, in paragraphs 2 and 3, it tells me that when working with another, I should be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. I am to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady, and talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. So, we are going to read a few of my favorite passages from the Big Book that describe the physical and mental conditions of alcoholism, and let you decide if you think you might be one. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. First, we will look at the alcoholic's physical problem with alcohol. From the section called The Doctor's Opinion, which is before Chapter 1, in the Roman numeral section of the book, I'm going to read from Roman numerals XXVIII, paragraph 1. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. People sometimes have a problem understanding what we mean when we say we have an allergy to alcohol. They are accustomed to thinking of an allergic reaction as breaking out in a rash with an itch. But what we mean when we say we have an allergy to alcohol is the phenomenon of craving. It is a phenomenon because it is not like a typical allergy. A typical allergic reaction makes me want to get away from whatever I am allergic to. But this allergic reaction is that I want more. It is the phenomenon of craving. I don't mean I would enjoy having another drink or two. I mean I want to drink the night away. I itch for more. Now I'm going to read from page 22, paragraph 4. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol whatever into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. So, after a while, the main problem of the alcoholic becomes his mind rather than his body. What started out as a physical allergy making me itch with the thought of another drink has eventually so trained my mind to think of drinking that now I have a permanent mental itch for drinking. You can lock me up for a long time without a drink, and the physical aspect of the allergy will go away. But at some point in the development of my alcoholism, I can never get rid of the mental itch. Let's see what the book has to say about the alcoholic's mental obsession. I'm turning to page 30, and I'm going to read paragraph 1. Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. So I can go to jail or go to treatment and be there long enough to become detoxed, to get it out of my system. Then, without being aggravated by the physical allergy, my mental obsession is not as strong, yet it never completely goes away. It is weaker, but it is persistent. It's that little itch in the back of my mind that wears me down until I feel desperate for a drink. I become more easily angered or more easily frustrated. The big book says we grow restless, irritable, and discontented unless we can experience the sense of ease and comfort that comes from taking a drink. Then, once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. So, once I have reactivated the allergy, it intensifies the mental obsession so that it dominates all my other thoughts. And this lifestyle has driven many of us through the gates of insanity or death. We also know for certain that alcoholism is a progressive illness. The physical and mental parts of alcoholism become more serious over time. So let's read about progression. I will continue on page 30 from paragraphs 2 and 3. We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but these intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. What this means is that once I have begun a life of drinking, over time, it becomes harder and harder for me to want to stop. And if I do get stopped, it becomes harder and harder for me to want to stay stopped. There is one more very important thing we must learn about the mental part of alcoholism. Flip back to page 24 and we'll read about it in paragraph 1. It says, "The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink." This is what we call the mental blank spot. And the big book says it is why alcoholism is hopeless. Back in my drinking days, there were times that I became so desperate that I quit drinking. I even went to church to change my life, and it really helped. I didn't drink for quite a while. But then I had a hard relapse. Eventually, in desperation, I went back to church and stayed sober again for a while before having another long, hard relapse. This happened over and over. When I first started going to AA meetings, I heard them say, "If you are an alcoholic, you are without defense against the first drink." I wondered if perhaps I were not an alcoholic because of those times that I stayed sober for a while. During those times, I turned down many drinks and pushed out of my mind many thoughts of drinking. Then I read the paragraph more closely and noticed that it said we are unable at certain times to push out of our mind the thought of a drink. And I remembered that no matter how good I had been doing and how strong I had been feeling, the day always came that I easily gave in to the thought of a drink. There are a couple of really good examples of the mental blank spot I want you to look at. I'm going to have you pause the video, read the passage, then turn the video back on for my comment. So pause and read starting from page 35, paragraph 2, through the last paragraph of page 36. Pause here. You read story about a man who had a car dealership but lost it because of his drinking. He got sober and was hired by the new owner to be a salesman for the business he once owned. One day he relapsed, and when they asked him what happened, he said, "I began to be resentful that I was a salesman for a business I once owned. I came to work one morning and had a few words with the boss. Then I drove out to where I thought I might find someone interested in buying a car. Along the way, I became hungry, so I stopped for lunch. I went in and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I decided to have another sandwich and another glass of milk. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't bother me on a full stomach. That was the mental obsession popping up. He said, I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I had a vague sense I was not being any too smart. That was the mental blank spot. Then he ordered another drink. That is because of the physical allergy. Then he had another drink, and thus began his journey back to treatment. Now, I want you to pause and read page 39, paragraph 2, through the last paragraph of page 41. So pause now. In this story, you read about a man who was an accountant. He ended up in treatment for the first time. Some AA members came and talked with him. They explained about the allergy and the obsession. He agreed he had those, but when they told him about the mental blank spot, which guaranteed that no matter how hard he tried, one day he would drink again, he said he did not believe that was possible after what he had learned. He just needed to exercise his willpower and keep on guard. So he left the hospital, and for a time all went well. He had no trouble refusing drinks. That means he was having the thoughts, but having no trouble pushing those thoughts away. One day he went out of town on an important business trip, which turned out quite successful. It was the end of a perfect day. So he went back to the hotel and dressed for dinner. As he crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that a cocktail would be nice before dinner, so he sat down and ordered one. Notice, when he entered the dining room, the obsession tapped him on the shoulder and suggested a cocktail would be nice before dinner. So he sat down and ordered one. Wow, this guy was totally blank. At least the car salesman had a vague sense he was not being any too smart. But this guy did not even have that. He just had the thought and ordered the cocktail. He hit a total blank spot. So then he ordered another cocktail because the allergy was kicking in. After dinner, he went for a walk. When he returned to the hotel, it struck him to have a highball before going to bed. Notice, when he stepped into the restaurant, the obsession tapped him on the shoulder. After a couple of cocktails, the obsession struck him and drove him into the bar to have a highball before going to bed. He had several more that night and plenty next morning because of the allergy. He can't remember the next few days, until he came to in the hospital. As soon as he regained his ability to think, he remembered how those AA people had told him that if he had an alcoholic mind, no matter how hard he tried, the day would come that he would drink again. He understood then what they meant when they said that his willpower, which had worked so well on all those other days, would not work when he hit a mental blank spot. He knew then that he had an alcoholic mind, and they had said it was a hopeless state of mind to ever permanently escape from. This chapter ends on page 43, and I want to read the last paragraph. It says, "Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power." Do you feel that you have had similar experiences? Are you ready to admit that you are powerless over alcohol? That your life has become unmanageable? Then you have taken step one. Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Reading from page 45, a portion of paragraphs 1 and 2. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. You may be wondering, what version of God is AA going to try to make you believe in? We don't do that. We want you to choose your own conception of God. If you say, "I don't believe in God," I say, you don't want to believe in God. It's never a matter of faith. It's always a matter of the will. Let me prove it to you. On page 46, I'm going to read from paragraphs 1 and 2. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with Him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. So I will ask the unbeliever, can you prove to me there is no God? He may try. He may talk about the theory of evolution or some other books and theories he's read about, to which I say, yes, but can you prove there is no God? Because none of his theories prove anything. Finally, he will have to throw up his hands and say, no, I can't prove to you there is no God, but you can't prove to me that there is. To which I say, I'm not trying to prove to you there is a God. I'm just trying to get you to admit that you can't prove that there isn't. Because as soon as you admit that you can't prove there is no God, you have admitted the possibility that there might be. So, if there is a God, would you like him to reveal himself to you as you work the rest of the steps? If you want him to, he will. And the only thing that will stop that is if you don't want him to. So, I ask you, if there is a God, would you like him to reveal himself to you as you work the rest of the steps? If you say yes, then you have taken step 2. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. If you are a skeptic, such as we just described, you may be asking, how do I turn my will and my life over to something I'm not sure I believe in yet? Well, you just did. You just said, if there is a God, I would like him to reveal himself to me as I work the rest of the steps. So, let's move on. I'm turning to page 60, and we'll begin reading at paragraph 2. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholics and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. Being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our lives over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So, before the book describes what a life turned over to the will of God looks like, it's going to describe what a life that is not turned over to the will of God looks like, and to try to convince us why we can't live like that anymore. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may become mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits. What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? The subconscious alcoholic mind is very cunning. It wants to get me preoccupied and emotionally charged about something I think is important. That's when the nice thought of a drink might pop up. Remember back on page 24, in paragraph 1, we read, "We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink." The very next sentence says, "The almost certain consequences following taking even a glass of beer does not crowd into our minds to deter us." I used to think the mental blank spot occurred when I was in a low state of mental activity. I was mellowed out and got caught off guard. Now, I realize that the mental blank spot occurs when I am in a heightened state of mental activity, when my mind is crowded with thoughts that become emotionally charged. Then, the nice thought of a drink is likely to pop up. I have to have a strong thought not to take that drink. But if I am too focused on something else, the thought of what might happen if I take that drink may not be strong enough to grab my attention away from what I am preoccupied with. The car salesman was preoccupied with a resentment about his job. He had a few words with the boss and became emotionally charged. The accountant was preoccupied, preparing to go on an important business trip. He became emotionally charged when his business trip was successful. These are the times when I may be unable to bring into my consciousness with sufficient force the thought of the consequences of what might happen if I take a drink. That's when I may be without defense against the first drink. Picking up our reading on page 62 at the first paragraph. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. This is not talking about me being selfish, because when I broke the candy bar in half, I gave you the little piece and I took the big piece. This is talking about me being so preoccupied with my life and everybody in it, just how I'm going to get them to do what I want. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. Wow, it sounds like there are a lot of thoughts in my head trying to help me figure out just how to work on you. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. That means I must stop being so preoccupied with managing my own life. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them, even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. This is the how and why of it. Well, if this is the how and why of it, then I better pay close attention to the next paragraph, which is the last paragraph on page 62. It says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal, we are His agents. He is the Father, and we are His children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. It said, first of all, we had to quit playing God. So I'm going to try to stop letting self-centered fear determine all my thoughts and actions. Next, we decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. That means I'm going to try to have a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, so that God can begin to direct more of my thoughts and actions. We have now come to what I believe to be the most important paragraph in all the big book. Page 63, paragraph 1. It says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. Back on page 28 of the big book, the last part of paragraph 3 says, all of us are children of a living Creator, with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. It points out that to form a relationship with the Creator, it will be upon certain terms and conditions. And we find those terms here at page 63, paragraph 1, where it says, He is all-powerful and provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. So, if I want God to take care of me with His power, I must agree to keep close to Him and perform His work well. We learn how to do that as we work the rest of the steps. In steps 4 through 9, we remove the things that block our conscious contact with God so we can get close to Him. Then, steps 10 and 11 are maintenance steps, how we keep close to Him. And step 12 is how we perform His work well, by carrying this message to other alcoholics. And if I practice these principles in all my affairs, God will become my director, and all sorts of remarkable things will follow. You say, I'm still not sure I believe in God. That's okay, because it doesn't really matter what you believe or don't believe. It only matters what you do or don't do. Your experience from doing these things may change what you believe. So, will you honestly try to work the rest of these steps? When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. Then it says, established on such a footing. So, I must make sure you are established upon a clear understanding that there are terms to your relationship with God. And if you want Him to do what He said He would do, He will respond to nothing but you doing what you said you would do. And then nothing can stop Him. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And now, page 63, paragraph 2, which contains the third step prayer. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to our Maker, as we understood Him, God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. So, before I lead you in this prayer, let me ask you again, if there is a God, would you like Him to reveal Himself to you as you work the steps? Would you like Him to provide what you need by His power? Do you understand that nothing can stop him if you keep close to him and perform his work well, which you will learn how to do as you work the rest of the steps. Then let's read the next paragraph. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as our wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. But it is better to meet God alone than with one who might misunderstand. The wording, of course, was quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning, though if honestly and humbly made, an effect, sometimes a very great one, was felt at once. Sometimes people begin to feel a little excited about what might lie ahead. The big book says we will be rocketed into another dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. So, if you are ready, I will lead you in this prayer. If you can bring yourself to do so, you might try kneeling down. Now, repeat after me. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Now, before you start on step 4, take a day to reread and reflect upon page 63, paragraphs 1 and 2, which are the terms of your agreement and your third step prayer. Be sure you are established upon these words, because life is going to try to jar you loose from them. But God will not fail you if you work your program. So take a day to reflect upon page 63, paragraphs 1 and 2. Then you can start on step 4. End of this session. This is the second session of the 12 Steps of Recovery in American Sign Language. We are going through the 12 steps using the book titled Alcoholics Anonymous, which AA members refer to as the Big Book. In this session, you will need some blank note paper and a pen or pencil. So pause the video while you gather these items. Now, if you are ready, we are on step 4, where we will be doing some soul searching and some writing. Then step 5, where we will admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Before we begin, however, I would like to read you one of my favorite paragraphs on page 25, paragraph 1. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, and the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. The great fact is just this, and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which has revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. Wow, what a paragraph. With that in mind, we will begin step 4, which is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We will pick up from where we left off at the last paragraph on page 63. And I will read through the second paragraph of page 65. Next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which was a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision, that is referring to your third step decision, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and to be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsellable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We asked ourselves why we were angry. In In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which had been interfered with? We were usually as definite as this example. So, the first part of our inventory is to search out and analyze our resentments. This is where we begin writing. We will analyze resentments in 4 columns. I'm going to have you do the 4 columns on 2 separate pages. That means there will be 2 columns to a page. I'm going to show you how to set up your first page. You can pause the video, copy it down, then resume the video for instructions. So, get ready to pause the video and copy this. You are ready now to do page 1 of your resentment inventory, beginning with column 1, titled, I Resent. The book said, in dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. But before you begin, I want to say a couple of things. We are not talking about trying to recall those random occasions that someone has upset you. We are talking about serious resentments of people that constantly annoy you, or an occasion when someone has really hurt you emotionally, or really hurt you physically, or really hurt you financially. And every time you think about it, it still makes you angry. Also, be sure to number them, and be sure to skip a line between each. I'm going to show you an example, and you can pause the video here and do column 1. Now I'm going to explain how to do column 2. Then I will show you what it looks like. It will be subtitled The Cause, and however many numbers you have in column 1, just go ahead and print the same amount of numbers in column 2 on every other line. What you will then notice is that gives you 2 lines to say why you were angry. That's because I don't need a story. I just need a statement. So get ready to pause the video and fill in column 2. Here's your example. Okay, you have completed column 2, stating why you were angry. The big book says, in most cases it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore. We were burned up. Now, to do columns 3 and 4, you will need a fresh sheet of paper. I will explain how I want you to fill it out and then show it to you. Remember when I told you everyone has a slightly different way of doing the steps? That this is simply my way? Well, to simplify columns 3 and 4 as much as I could, this is my way of doing columns 3 and 4. This is going to be page 2. At the top, in the center, you will write step 4. And below that, in the center, you will write resentments. Then, you will draw a line across the page and then a line down the middle of the page, just like we did on page 1. The left-hand column will be subtitled Affects My. Then we are going to go down this column and print those 5 things. Be sure you print on every other line. First, you will put self-esteem. Then skip a line and put pocketbook. And then skip a line and put ambitions. Then skip a line and put personal relations. Then skip a line and put sex relations. Get ready to pause the video to copy the example. Now, please pay close attention. I'm going to have you set page 1 to the left of page 2 so that you can see all of your columns, of which we will be filling out column 3. You will begin by going to column 1 and looking at resentment number 1. Let's say it was your dad. Then go to column 2 and read what you put as the why for resentment number 1. Let's say he drank too much and was abusive to me when drinking. Then you will come to column 3 and ask yourself, did that affect my self-esteem? If so, you will put a 1 under self-esteem. Did it affect my pocketbook? If so, you will put a 1 under pocketbook. Did it affect my ambitions? If so, put a 1 under ambitions. Did it affect my personal relations? Or did it affect my sex relations? If so, you will put a 1 under each that was affected. Then, go back and look at resentment number 2. Come to the second column and read what you put as the why for resentment 2. Then come to the third column and put a 2 under each that was affected. Then do resentment 3, and so on. Get ready to pause the video to see the example. Okay, we have completed column 3. Now, before we do column 4, I want to read a little more from the big book, adding in a few comments of my own along the way. We left off on page 65, so I'm going to pick up on page 65 at the last paragraph, and I'm going to read through the first paragraph of page 67. We went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. So, in our reasoning processes, these 3 columns was as far as most of us ever got. And with just these 3 columns, I can justify my anger. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. As we say in recovery, if nothing changes, nothing changes. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns, and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. In what state? In the state of being shut off from the sunlight of the Spirit. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. It said, how shall we escape? This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. There is a big spiritual principle attached to this word perhaps. The principle of forgiveness begins here. It is not saying that for a fact they were spiritually sick. It is saying perhaps. It's asking me to be willing to give the benefit of the doubt. The people on my resentment list, I don't know the sum total of their life's experiences and what might have shaped them to be the way they are or to do the things they sometimes do. Only God knows. And only God knows to what degree they deserve judgment or mercy. So I have to be willing to let God be the judge and trust Him with their judgment or mercy. This is the basis of forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't me saying that they haven't wronged me or that they don't owe me. Forgiveness is just me allowing God to be the collection agency for the universe. So I must be willing to turn the debt over to him. And for doing so, he is now free to reinsert back into my universe a blessing equal to or perhaps bigger than the damage I may have suffered. And for doing so, I am now free to receive it. Reading again. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us. They, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, "This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done." We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Giving people the benefit of the doubt is taking a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. We also just read what we call the anger prayer. And I'm going to have you write this prayer at the bottom of column 3. I will tell you what to write first, and then I will show it to you. So, at the bottom of column 3, write, "God, help me have tolerance, pity, and patience. Save me from being angry. Thy will be done." Get ready to pause the video and copy this. Now, let's look at page 67, paragraph 2. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? We're going to learn that all our selfish, dishonest, self-seeking behaviors are fear-driven, and we will be looking more at fear in a moment. But first, though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight. This paragraph brings us to column 4. This is where we look to see what we might have done to cause or aggravate the problem. The subtitle of this column will be I Affected. Then, just like in column 3, we are going to go down this column and write those same 5 things on every other line. First will be self-esteem, then skip a line and put pocketbook, skip a line and put ambitions, skip a line and put personal relations, skip a line and put sex relations. Here's how it should look, so pause the video and copy this. Now, with your page 1 to the left of page 2, go to column 1, which is your resentment column, and look at resentment number 1, which in our example was my dad. Then ask yourself, did I ever hurt or threaten my dad's self-esteem? If so, in column 4, put a 1 under self-esteem. Did I ever hurt or threaten my dad's pocketbook? If so, in column 4, put a 1 under pocketbook. Did I ever hurt or threaten my dad's ambitions, my dad's personal relations, or my dad's sex relations? If so, put a 1 under each that you affected. Then do resentment 2 and put a 2 under each that you affected. And then do resentment 3 and so on. So get ready to pause the video and fill out your column 4. Here's your example. Very good. But before we leave the resentment inventory, there is one more little thing I need you to do. I want you to look at column 1, your resentment column, and letting your conscience be your guide, ask yourself if you might possibly owe an amends to anyone in that column. If so, put a check mark by that name. We will come and get it later when you make your amends list. So pause the video to add any necessary check marks. Okay, now to finish up the resentment portion of the inventory, I want you to write this little prayer at the bottom of column 4. Write, God, help me to set these matters straight. Amen. Get ready to pause the video to copy this. That completes the resentment portion of the inventory. So now let's read some more. We are at page 67, paragraph 3. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. Back on page 65, there was a suggested example of how to do the resentment columns, which we skipped over. But yes, I noticed that the word fear was bracketed alongside those examples. My question was, why did they bracket the word fear alongside those examples? Well, didn't we read that we felt our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened? Doesn't feeling threatened imply fear? That is why they bracketed the word fear alongside those examples. So now we are learning that behind every resentment is a self-centered fear. And this brings us to the fear portion of the inventory, which, in my opinion, teaches us the most important lessons. Reading again. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but Did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think that fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. There is a very important lesson to learn from this paragraph. It says, fear will bring me misfortune. I will feel I don't deserve it, but I myself set the ball rolling. If that is true, I could be my own worst enemy. I have a little example I like to use about the fear ball. The fear ball sets on a circle track. Life deals me a misfortune. I have a knee-jerk fear reaction and kick the ball. Around the track it goes. It goes behind a curtain into the unseen spirit dimension. It sets in motion a chain of events that will actually bring me misfortune. So, the fear ball comes around the track, pops out of the curtain, and hits me with the next misfortune, to which I have another knee-jerk fear reaction and kick the ball again. Around the track it goes. It picks up another misfortune, comes around the circle, pops out of the curtain, and hits me with the next misfortune, to which I have another fear reaction. And this has become the basis on which I live my life. Of course, many of these misfortunes were brought to me by someone, and now I am blaming them. And until I learn this spiritual truth, I will always blame them. I will never see me as part of the problem. The Big Book said back on page 62, we invariably find that at some time in the past, we have made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. I used to think that this meant that at some time in the past, I did something to this person that caused them to do this to me today. But some of these people I had never seen before. So now I realize that at some time in the past, I could have reacted to some other situation on the basis of self-centered fear and set the ball rolling to bring me this misfortune by this person today. Now, I realize there are things that happen to us in which we did not set the ball rolling. We were the innocent victims of pure misfortune. But if I reacted negatively to it then and have continued to act negatively about it, that has led to many misfortunes since. So, there is first a situation and then a reaction. And the reaction becomes the bigger part of the problem. Spiritual truth can be brutal when it's working against us, but it is powerful when we learn how to react and have it working for us. So, let's get ready to start our fear inventory. You will take a fresh sheet of paper and number it page 3. At the top in the center, you will put step 4. And under that in the center, you will put fear. And the first thing you will write on your fear inventory is, I myself set the fear ball rolling. So get ready to pause the video and write this. Moving on. next paragraph, which is page 68, paragraph 1. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We set them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. So it says to review our fears thoroughly and then set them on paper. We first learned about our self-centered fears when we did our resentment inventory. Remember that fear was bracketed alongside each resentment? Because we felt our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, or our sex relations were hurt or threatened. So those are our self-centered fears. Now, let's write them on our fear inventory. So far you have, I myself set the fear ball rolling. Now, let's add self-esteem threatened, fear in brackets. Pocketbook threatened, fear in brackets. Ambitions threatened, fear in brackets. Personal relations threatened, fear in brackets. Sex relations threatened, fear in brackets. Now pause the video and add these to your fear inventory. It should look like this. Okay, let's look at the paragraph again. It says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We set them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. That means I had these fears before I ever had any resentments connected to them. And you could eliminate my resentments and I would still have these fears, because these fears are really connected to my self-centeredness. So we are going to move the focus from our resentment inventory to our fear inventory, because these fears are what drive my reactions to them. So now I want you to write this. My problems today are not connected to people. They are connected to the fear-based reaction I had to problems yesterday. To reduce my problems of tomorrow, I must change the way I react to problems today. So pause the video while you add this to your resentment inventory. Next, the paragraph says, we asked ourselves why we had these fears. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? You will notice that is past tense. That means as I have tried to play God and be in control of my life, I have discovered that I am not omnipotent. At the game of life, some days I have got a base hit, and some days I have struck out. And now it is not possible for me to step up to the plate in the game of life without being afraid that I might strike out again, because that is a very real possibility. The paragraph goes on to say, some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. So what if, at the game of life, I had managed to work up a pretty good batting average? Would that fully solve my fear problems? Do you suppose that this world's millionaires have fully solved their fear problems? Not if they haven't learned how to live on a spiritual basis. In chapter 1 of Bill's story, he wrote that when the stock market crashed in 1929, rich men were jumping from high towers of finance. That was because their biggest fear had struck. So, let's add this sentence to your fear inventory. My fears are based on self-reliance and my limited abilities. So pause the video here and write this. Now let's look at page 68, paragraph 2. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. I always pause here and ask my sponsees, when did you get on a different basis? Wasn't it back at step 3? When you made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, that put your life on a different basis. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. That means my life is no longer on the basis of self-reliance and my limited abilities. It says, we trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. I always pause here and ask my sponsees, when were you given an assignment? Wasn't that also back at step 3? When you made a decision to turn your will and life over to the care of God, it said He was all-powerful and would provide what you needed if you kept close to Him and performed His work well. So, keeping close to Him and performing His work well is now your assignment. And it says, you are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. So just to the extent that I do my assignment, He will match all my calamities with serenity. That means that when the fear ball comes around now and hits me with another misfortune, I do not have to have a knee-jerk fear reaction. Now, I have been given a different set of actions to take. I act upon my third step agreement with God, and that kicks the ball back around the way from which it came. And it sets spiritual forces into play so that the ball comes around, pops out of the curtain, and hands me a blessing. And this is the most powerful spiritual truth of all. So now, it is possible for me to take every misfortune and react to it in a way that something good will come out of it. So I now know how to turn the fear ball into a blessing ball. So now, let's add to your fear inventory. My reactions today should be based on my third step agreement with God. Then in brackets, put blessing ball. Here's how it should look. So pause the video and write it down. Very good. Now, let's read the last paragraph of the fear inventory, which is page 68, paragraph 3. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. So what would He have us be? He would have us be trusting God and be attending to our assignment. So the last thing we're going to write on our fear inventory is this prayer. You will write, God, I ask you to remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Then, in parentheses, add, to be trusting God and be attending to my assignment. Pause the video and write this down. That completes the fear portion of the inventory. Now we will do the sex portion of the inventory. Beginning on page 68, at the last paragraph, we will read down to the last paragraph of page 69. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there. But above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here, we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then, we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. The first thing I would like to say about the sex inventory, in my opinion, is that the sex inventory is not about the sex act. It is about relationships. It said we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? So, it is about our effort to try to have a meaningful, committed relationship. It said we reviewed our own conduct over the years past. So, you will take a fresh sheet of paper and number it page 4. At the top, in the center, you will put step 4. And under that, in the center, you will put sex. Then, going down the page, putting one name under the other, not the names of everyone you've ever had sex with, just the names of those you have tried to have a meaningful, committed relationship with. If you are currently in a committed relationship, be sure and add that name to the list. So, here's how it should look. Pause the video and copy this. Next, it asked us where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. That should seem familiar because back on page 67 in paragraph 2, it asked where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And I told you then we were going to discover that all of our selfish, dishonest, self-seeking behaviors were fear-driven. And that launched us into the fear inventory. Now here in the sex inventory, we have practically the same questions. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? The word frightened does not appear here, but it doesn't need to, because we just learned that it is the invisible force behind all our selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate behaviors. So, after your last name, I want you to skip a line and put selfish, and under that put dishonest, and under that put inconsiderate. Then, beside each, I want you to put the word fear in brackets. So, I'm going to show you what that should look like. You can pause the video now and copy this. The most important thing I learned from this part of the inventory was that even when I thought I was in love, I was still self-centered and driven by fear. I remember when I used to say I love to drink, but was it really love, or was it just that I was not as afraid of living life with alcohol as I was afraid of living life without alcohol? It wasn't really love. It was just a lesser degree of fear. And yes, that did feel better. And so it is with relationships. Am I in love, or am I just not as afraid of facing life with a relationship as I am afraid of facing life without a relationship? It's not really love. It's just a lesser degree of fear. And yes, that does feel better. And as long as I am a self-centered person, I will always be ruled by fear in greater or lesser degrees. So now I want you to add this sentence. My feeling of love has just been a lesser degree of fear. So pause the video now and add this sentence. Real love is of God, and Learning to be a God-centered person takes practice and takes time. So, without practice and time, don't be too quick to believe you're in love. We read a prayer that said we asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. So we're going to add this prayer to the sex inventory. Put, God, I ask you to mold my ideals about love and relationships and help me to live up to them. So get ready to pause the video and add this prayer. Okay. Now, we also read, whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. So, just as with the resentment inventory, when I asked you to put a check mark by the name of any person you felt you may owe an amends, now we will do the same with the sex inventory. Letting your conscience be your guide, put a check mark by the name of any person you feel you may owe an amends. We will come and get these names when we make our amends list. So pause the video as you add any necessary check marks. Now, there is just a little more to read to finish up the sex portion of the fourth step inventory. I will be starting at the last paragraph on page 69. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we are going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity, and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge, when to yield would mean heartache. If we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot. We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We have begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. For now, we put check marks by those names. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We hope you are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from him. If you have already made a decision, that's referring to your third step decision. If you have already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. It's said we have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about ourselves. So I want to recap those big chunks of truth and have you write them down on a fresh sheet of paper. I will describe it and then show it to you so you can copy it down. I will describe it and then show it to you so you can copy it down. This page will be numbered page 5. At the top in the center, it will say Step 4, and under that in the center, Big Truths About Myself. Now, there are 4. Number 1, my serenity comes from the sunlight of the Spirit. People and situations cannot block me from God. Resentment and all such fear-based feelings block the sunlight of the Spirit, leaving me unhappy with people and situations. 2, I can forgive. Forgiveness isn't feeling okay about what happened. Forgiveness is trusting God with their judgment or mercy. Number 3, I have lived on the basis of fear, which sets the ball rolling to bring misfortune, which sparks more fear. My new basis is to respond to trouble with certain actions which demonstrate my trust in God. This reverses the ball to bring solution to and blessing out of each misfortune. And number 4, I only have capacity for love when spiritually fit. When spiritually maladjusted, I only have capacity for fear in greater or lesser degrees. So pause the video and copy this page. We are beginning Chapter 6 on page 72. I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs. Having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now, these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapter. This is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. We think we have done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us found it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons for why we should do so. The best reason first. If we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves, but they had not learned enough humility, fearlessness, and honesty, in the sense we find it necessary, until they told someone else all their life story. Okay, I like to do step 5 in 2 parts, A and B. In part A, we will be admitting the nature of our wrongs. Not any specific wrongs themselves, but the underlying nature of our wrongs. So, what we read said, we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. You will notice it said, that's what we have been doing. So, I went back through the material we have covered so far to find where we did those things and what we learned about the basic nature of us all. And since it is the basic nature of us all, I wrote it down. And all you need to do is copy it. And if you agree with it, that will be your admission. So, I'm going to read you my paper and then show it to you so you can copy it down. This will be page 6. At the top, in the center, you will put step 5A. And under that, in the center, you will put I admit. Then here is what you will write. I admit that I am a self-willed person. I have become convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. I am trying to get a new attitude. Therefore, I have decided to quit playing God and let God be the director. I have formed a new relationship with the Creator upon simple and understandable terms. The terms are that He is my employer and will provide what I need if I keep close to Him and perform His work well. The obstacles in my path are these defects: fears about my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambitions, personal relations, and sex relations. Selfish self-centeredness is the troubling root of my defects. My personal weak items have been when my blank or blank was hurt or threatened. You will notice I left 2 blanks. Just go ahead and draw the blanks, and I will explain what to do with them in a moment. Also, you will notice that I put the page and paragraph where these things were found. I suggest that you also write down the references. So, get ready to pause the video and copy this paper. Very good. Now, where you wrote, my particular weak items have been when my blank or blank was hurt or threatened. Here's how you will fill in those blanks. Back on page 2 of your notes is columns 3 and 4 of your resentment work. Column 3 is the left-hand column. It is titled Affects My. In that column, you wrote self-esteem, pocketbook, ambitions, personal relations, and sex relations. Then you put under each of those items the number belonging to any resentment that may have affected that item. So now, see which of those items you have the most numbers under. Then, see which of those items you have the next most numbers under. Those will be your 2 weak items. Then, come back to page 6, which is step 5A, and where it says, my particular weak items have been when my blank or blank was hurt or threatened. Fill in those blanks with these 2 items. That will complete step 5A. So pause the video now and fill in those 2 blanks. So now, let me explain step 5B. What we read also said, time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Now, because it says, until they told someone else all their life story, it has become very common in AA for sponsors to tell their sponsees to go and write me your whole life story, a very revealing account. And people have spent weeks and sometimes written 30 or 40 pages of their whole life story. That is an overwhelming task. But they seemed to not have noticed what it was really trying to say was that time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts. They hung on to some of the worst items in stock. So this is not about having you write me your whole life story. What it is about is that if I asked you to write me your whole life story, a very revealing account, it is very likely that you would still leave out certain things which you just could not bring yourself to tell. So when you brought me those 30 or 40 pages of your whole life story, I could just toss them in the trash and tell you, now go back and write down those few things that you left out, your worst items in stock, because those are the things we are really after. So you're going to take a fresh sheet of paper and number it page 7. At the top, in the center, you will put step 5B. And under that, in the center, you will put, I also admit. Then write this sentence. These certain facts are my worst items in stock. So get ready to pause the video and copy this. Very good. Now, you should probably take at least a week to carefully think back over your life, letting your conscience be your guide as you fill out this paper. Remember, this is not about confessing all your sins. This is where you confess those things which the big book says we tremble to have to tell someone. Most of us only have a few such things and can probably get them onto one page. But if you have any deep, dark secrets, it is very important that you tell one person. Be careful that you do not write a detailed account, because someone might find your paper and read it. Just put down something that will serve as a memory jogger, so that when you get with your sponsor and look at your paper, you will remember the things you need to tell. But before you go to get with your sponsor and do your 5th step, be sure to look at the next segment of the video first for some last-minute preparations. So pause the video here until you complete this task. Good luck and God bless. Wonderful. And now that you are continuing the video, I assume you have been with your sponsor and done your 5th step. So, congratulations. Now we will proceed. Let's read some more from the big book. We are at page 75, paragraph 2. It says, we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. Those are what we call the 5th step promises. One of them mentions beginning to feel the nearness of our Creator. Bill Wilson wrote in another place that all of AA's 12 steps deflate our egos. When I deflate my ego, I let God in. If I inflate my ego, I push God out. And you have just gone through some serious ego deflation. So I believe that you and your Creator have moved closer together. Therefore, your prayers should now start getting better results. So here is something I like to do with people I take through the steps. Since some of your dark secrets may have involved other people, you may be feeling some deep regrets. And since God wants to free you from guilt and shame, this would be a good time for you to pray for any of the people that may have been a part of your dark secrets. Just mention each name one by one and ask God to add to their life a blessing equal to any damage you may have caused. You might find that this will play a big part in your own healing. So, pause the video here if you have any people you would like to pray for. Very good. So, now that you have been with your sponsor to do your 5th step, and if you have prayed for any of the people that may have been involved in your dark secrets, then I'm ready to resume reading. We are at page 75, paragraph 3. It says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. I would like you to literally make that an hour, where you go into your room, look at the clock, and stay there for 1 full hour. Tell people you do not want to be disturbed. During this hour, I would like you to carefully review all your notes, particularly pages 5 and 6 of your notes. Page 5 was Big Truths About Myself, and page 6 was Step 5A, I admit the nature of my wrongs. Try to recall as much as you can about those 2 pages. Next, the book says, we thank God from the bottom of our hearts that we know Him better. I call that the 5th step prayer. Next, it says, taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. That is page 59. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. So, I'm going to turn back to page 59 and go over the first 5 steps with you. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Remember, we talked about the conditions of body and mind which accompany alcoholism. The allergy and the obsession, the progression, and the mental blank spot. Are you satisfied with your step 1? Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That was when I asked you if you were willing to let God prove Himself to you as you work the steps. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This was where I explained the terms of our agreement with God, that He is all-powerful and provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well, which required us to make a commitment to work the rest of the steps. Are you still committed? Step 4 and 5 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, then admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, including our deep, dark secrets. Are you satisfied with your first 5 steps? If so, I'm flipping back to where we left off on page 75 in paragraph 3. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. Step 6 says, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. I am reading now from the top of page 76. If we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something, we will not let go. We ask God to help us be willing. I call that the 6-step prayer, and it covers 2 possibilities. One is that sometimes people have deliberately held back something from their 5th step because they just did not have the courage to tell it. This prayer is asking God to help them find the courage. The second possibility is that sometimes people have buried something so deep into their conscience that they just did not remember it. This is asking God to help them recall it and tell it to their sponsor. Reading again. If we still cling to something, we will not let go. We ask God to help us be willing. When ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. That was the 7th step prayer. So, we have a 5th step prayer, a 6th step prayer, and a 7th step prayer. I'm going to have you write these 3 prayers together on one page. Then, at the end of your hour of review, before you come out of your room, I would like you to kneel go down and pray these 3 prayers together. I'm going to read you the paper and then show it to you so you can copy it down. This will be page 8. At the top, in the center, you will put steps 5, 6, 7. And under that, in the center, you will put prayers. Then you will write 5. God, I thank you from the bottom of my heart that I know you better. Then skip a line and put 6. If I still cling to something I will not let go, I ask you to help me be willing. Then skip a line and put 7. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. Pray those prayers at the end of your hour, and you will have completed step 7. So, get ready to pause the video and copy this page. This is the 3rd session of the 12 Steps of Recovery in American Sign Language. We are going through the 12 steps using the book titled Alcoholics Anonymous, which AA members refer to as the Big Book. So you have completed step 7 and are ready to move on. We will pick up from where we left off on page 76, paragraph 3. Now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Now let's examine this paragraph. It says, we have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. Remember when you did your resentment work, I had you put a check mark by the name of any person you felt you may owe an amends. Also, when you did the sex portion of your inventory, I had you put a check mark by the name of any person you felt you may owe an amends. Now, we are going to get those names and put them on a list. So, you will need to take a fresh sheet of notepaper and number it page 9. At the top, in the center, you will put steps 8 and 9. And under that, in the center, you will put amends. Now, there will be 2 columns on this page. So, below your title, you will draw a line across the page. And from the center of that line, you will draw another line down the middle of the page. The left column will be subtitled My List, and the right column will be subtitled My Prayer. Let me show it to you, and you can stop the video here and copy it. Okay? Now, you will go back to page 1 of your resentment work and get your checked names and transfer them over to page 9 and put them in the left-hand column titled My List. Then you will go to page 4, which was the sex portion of your inventory, and get those checked names and transfer them over to your list. So pause the video here while you transfer the names from page 1 and 4 to your list. Very good. Now I would like to read you something from another book Bill wrote called The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Here's something he said about Step 8. Every AA has found that he can make little headway in this new adventure of living until he first backtracks and really makes an accurate and unsparing survey of the human wreckage he has left in his wake. To a degree, he has already done this when taking moral inventory. But now, the time has come when he ought to redouble his efforts to see how many people he has hurt and in what ways. Notice, he said, to a degree we made our list when taking moral inventory. There's a good possibility that I owe amends to more people than just those in my resentment inventory and those in my sex inventory. So this is where we try to recall any additional names that may need to go on this list. So I'm going to have you pause and take a few minutes to add any other names you may recall. Remember, this is an open-ended list. You may think of more names next month or next year, and you can add them to your list then. But just take a few minutes now to add any additional names that readily come to mind. So pause the video here and think. Now, let's look at some more of our paragraph. It went on to say, now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. I'm going to have you write that prayer, but first I want to tell you a little story. I heard someone say in a meeting once that when he first got sober, he owed a guy some money, but he didn't have a job at the time. He would occasionally drive by the guy's street and think, someday when I've got the money, I want to be sure to stop and pay him. He said, well, I've been sober for about 3 years now and have had a good job for a while. But now I drive by the guy's street and think, someday when I'm not so busy, I want to be sure to stop and pay him. He said, I realize I am procrastinating, that my willingness level has dropped, and I'm probably on thin ice. So here's what I want you to write in the column titled My Prayer. You will put, God, help me be willing to make my amends and remain willing until done. It should look like this. So pause the video and copy it. Very good. But before we pray this prayer, we're going to add a little more to it first. Let's turn to page 79, paragraph 1. It says, although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing. What spiritual experience do you suppose they're talking about? They're talking about the experience of receiving strength and direction from our Creator. Back when you did your 5th step, I told you that all of AA's 12 steps were to deflate our egos, and that as we deflate our egos, we let God in. I told you after you did your 5th step that you had gone through enough ego deflation that the promises say we can begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. But here, in steps 8 and 9, where we make a list of all persons we have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all, this process plunges us deep enough into humility to not only feel the nearness of our Creator, but now we can ask for strength and direction to do the right thing and begin to feel His guidance. It says, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences might be. We may lose our position, our reputation, or face jail, but we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. The process of making amends can sometimes feel scary, but we're talking about receiving the kind of strength and guidance from God to walk through these fears. This is an experience that most alcoholics must have if we are to ever learn how to walk through the drama of life and not drink. Sometimes when I'm doing step work with someone and we have just completed their 8-step list, they ask me questions like, which one do you think I should do first? Or, what do you think I should say? I tell them, don't ask me. These are the questions you need to sit quietly and ask your Creator. And when you feel like you might be getting some thoughts that could be coming from your higher power, start to write them down, and the experience will grow. After you have written a little paragraph, you may come back the next day and read it and feel like you want to change a word or two. But you'll know when it is just right, and that is what you should say to that person. Remember, it's not about how much you say, it's about how precisely you have selected your words. Of course, it's not a bad idea to share with your sponsor what you think you should say, and maybe get some feedback from him. But don't let your sponsor do it for you, or you'll miss out on this vital experience. So, your prayer says God, help me be willing to make my amends and remain willing until done. Now add, I ask that I be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences might be. You can pray this prayer each time you sit down with your higher power to prepare what you might say for your next amends. Let me show it to you so you can pause the video and copy it. After you copy it, kneel down and pray it for the first time. Here it is. Now, let's read the 9th step promises, beginning on page 83 at the last paragraph. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Notice, developing a sense of intuition is one of the benefits of doing step 9. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Now we are ready to look at step 10, which is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. We are at page 84, paragraph 2. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. This seems to indicate that step 10 can be used while doing step 9. This is why I believe steps 8, 9, and 10 go together in a group. Until now, every step had to be finished before moving on to the next step. But since step 9, cleaning up the wreckage of the past, may take some time, we are given step 10 to continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. I call this the 4 and 4 because there are 4 things we continue to watch for, and when they crop up, there are 4 things that we do about them. We continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When they crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Step 10 is referred to as a spot check inventory. It is very simple, but very powerful. And here's why. Back at step 3, you made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God. And it said, when we sincerely took such a position, we had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. But before you could keep close to him, you had to first get close to him. And you did that with steps 4 through 9. Those steps opened your conscious contact with God. Now, all you need to do is keep close to him and perform his work well. And you do that with this simple 4 and 4. In all circumstances and under pressure, if you will continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, and when they crop up, ask God at once to remove them, discuss them with someone immediately, make amends quickly if you have harmed anyone, then resolutely turn your thoughts to someone you can help, and you will be keeping close to him and performing his work well. That process will take any problem you will ever have and put it in God's hands. And with practice, you will be amazed at the results. So, memorize the 4 and 4 and meditate on it often so that when life explodes in your face, you will react with the 4 and 4. Now, I'm going to turn and read the last paragraph of step 10, which is page 85, paragraph 2. Much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. Now, you can read all the way through step 10, and you will not find anything about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from God. That was in step 9. This is another reason why I believe step 10 is to be used with step 9. It says, if we have carefully followed directions, that means using the 4 and 4 while doing step 9, if we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his Spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God-conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. But we must go further, and that means more action. Which brings us to step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. So with the 4 and 4 of step 10, we keep close to him and perform his work well. But step 11 is going to teach us how to keep closer to him and perform his work better. We are now at the last paragraph of page 85. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer, better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have a proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. And now the Big Book is going to give us 2 meditation exercises. I have gone to many Step 11 workshops, and I have never heard anyone teach prayer and meditation from the Big Book. But here are some definite and valuable suggestions for us alcoholics. We are now at page 86, paragraph 1, and this is Meditation Exercise 1. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, afraid? Those are the same 4 things that were in the 4 and 4 of Step 10. This is just another inventory, but not a spot check inventory. This is a meditation exercise. Not when these crop up, but when we retire at night. Not keeping close to Him by maintaining a conscious contact with God, but keeping closer to Him by improving our conscious contact with God. So Step 11 has more than just 4 things to watch for. It says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, afraid? Do we owe an apology? Are we keeping something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. This is a very easy meditation exercise. Let me tell you how I do it. I like to do this meditation prayerfully, so I kneel down. I open my Big Book to page 86, paragraph 1, and before I begin, I take probably less than a minute to recall the day, where I went, what I did, and any significant people I may have encountered during the day. And while that is fresh on my mind, I start asking myself the questions. Was I resentful? Selfish? Dishonest? Afraid? I take a deep breath between each one. That gives me a chance to feel if my God conscience is trying to call my attention to any one of these questions. And if so, I inquire what corrective measures should be taken. This takes me less than 5 minutes. But I have since begun to expand my evening meditation by praying for the significant people I encountered during the day. I just mention their name and say, "Thy will be done." Also, something else I like to do as part of my evening meditation, since I have just recalled the day, I like to express gratitude for anything that happened that day that I should be thankful for. I keep a gratitude journal. So I get up and write my nightly entry. I just put the date and say, "Dear God, thank you for this, and this today." You don't have to add these things, but I'll bet that eventually you will enjoy taking a little more time in your evening meditation. Now, we are ready to look at Meditation Exercise 2 on page 86, paragraph 2. But first, let me say this. The only way to properly interpret the steps is to remember our third step agreement. In step 3, we read that the how and why of this program is for God to become our director. And it said he would do that if we agreed to certain terms. And through that agreement, we were told, we now have a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Notice there was nothing else. Keeping close to him is by taking inventory of ourselves. Performing his work well in AA is by being of service to other alcoholics. So everything after step 3 must pertain to either inventory or service. And so our 2 meditation exercises must also pertain to either inventory or service. And by practicing these 2 exercises, God will become our director. And with that in mind, I will now read page 86, paragraph 2. It says, "On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives." Now, let's examine this paragraph. It said, "On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day." I don't know about you, but when I wake up, I think, what are the things I have to do today? Then it says, "Before we begin," that means before I head out the door to start doing these things. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. Didn't our step 3 agreement tell us we now have a new employer? Then before I head out the door, maybe I should take a few minutes to bring my thinking into his employ. And what is the job my employer has asked me to do? In AA, it is to help another alcoholic to achieve sobriety. And what tools have I been given to do that with? It is the steps, as they are explained in this book. That means I have a responsibility to study and get to know this book. So I'm going to try to start my day with a little prayer. I like to use the 3rd step prayer. Then maybe get a cup of coffee, open my big book, and not just read it, but study it. And if I have been maintaining my conscious contact with God through my evening inventory, then when I begin to study the big book, I will begin to get inspired insights of how to explain it to others. I have learned to keep pen and paper close at hand to write down these thoughts. Some mornings I get new thoughts to add to old ones. On page 164, we are told that our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. That means this book is only a little of what God has to say. The rest is deeper spiritual insights to the book. So again, page 164 says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditations what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. That means the quality of my morning meditations is determined by maintaining and improving my conscious contact with God through my evening inventory. These two meditation exercises pertain to how to keep close to him and how to perform his work well. And they will absolutely tune you to receiving inspiration and guidance from God. This brings us to page 86, paragraph 3. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here, we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. Now, let's examine this paragraph. It says, in thinking about our day. That means I have closed my big book, put away my pen and paper, and have gone back to thinking about my day. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here, we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. So, coming fresh out of my morning meditation, where I was focused on performing his work well and receiving inspiration and insights into this book, in the afterglow of that, if in thinking about my day I face indecision, I can ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision, and begin learning how to receive guidance in my personal affairs. The first thing I must learn is to relax and take it easy and not struggle. That means to not overthink a situation and get stressed out about it. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. So it does take practice. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. I compare this to a three-tiered fountain. The water comes out at the top and spills into a little bowl. This is my evening inventory and inquiring what corrective measures should be taken. This is the simplest of the meditations, but it is of the highest priority, because humbling myself to receive correction and being willing to make amends if necessary is what positions me to receive guidance from God. This little bowl spills over into the second bowl, which is a little larger. This represents my morning meditative reading, which expands my conscious contact with God. Then this bowl spills over into the third largest bowl, which is all the rest of my life, in which God wants to become my director. These 3 paragraphs on page 86 will bring me into the full experience of the program, which Bill Wilson said will grow incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Now let's turn to page 87, paragraph 3, and we will sum up step 11. But first, I would like to point out one sentence in paragraph 2. It says, if we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. Notice it says, we attend to that also. It did not say, we attend to that instead of. And if you are an alcoholic, this is a wise suggestion. Now, 87, paragraph 3. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves that we are no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, thy will be done. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works. It really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined. But this is not all. There is action and more action. Faith without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. This chapter is titled Working with Others, and it begins on page 89. I would like to start by reading the first 2 paragraphs. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. life will take on new meaning to watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. This chapter is about putting step 12 into action, but your meditative reading and study of the big book is step 12 in preparation. And your putting step 12 into action will be benefited by your step 12 in preparation. Now, paragraph 3. Perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They will be only too glad to assist you. Keep in mind, when this book was written, there were only a few established AA meetings in existence. This book was sent out across the country, and alcoholics had to take this book and try to get AA started in their town. Therefore, there are suggestions in this chapter about how to find and approach alcoholics. But things have changed. Now, there are AA meetings everywhere. And just as in the old days, country doctors had to get on their horse and ride from farm to farm, making house calls, delivering babies and treating sick people throughout their territory. But as little towns were established, doctors set up clinics, and people began to come to the doctor. As towns grew, hospitals were built, where the sick poured in to find help. Today, in most towns, there are well-established AA meetings where people come to find help. What I need to do is show up at my group, spiritually fit and ready to be of service. I'm not going to read any more of this chapter because what I have said from the first 3 paragraphs gives you the main idea. You can read the rest for yourself in your own time. But I want to be sure you understand that keeping close to Him and performing His work well does far more than just keep me sober. It keeps me in a growing experience with God becoming my director and managing my life, so that my life becomes a story to share with others. I would like to end by reading you one of my favorite paragraphs from this chapter, however, which is page 100, paragraph 1. It says, "Both you and the new man must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances." What are the dictates of your higher power? Remember, we have a new employer. Being all-powerful, He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. So, follow the dictates of your higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. I have seen how difficult it is for deaf alcoholics to access and receive the full benefit of being in AA. And although our book, Alcoholics Anonymous, is available in American Sign Language, I know of nothing available in ASL to guide you through the steps. And when it comes to getting a sponsor, it is also very difficult for you to be sponsored by a hearing person. My hope is that this video will guide you through the steps, and as you replay it and study it, you then will be able to sponsor your fellows, for you can help them when no one else can. Remember what I said in the beginning, that everyone in AA has a slightly different way of presenting the 12 steps. I have never seen a way that worked for everyone, nor have I ever seen a way that didn't work for some. This has simply been my way of presenting the 12 steps. I hope it has helped you. I do know of a couple of online resources that may also be helpful. One is www.aa-intergroup.org. You can also go to Facebook and look for DODA. Now, I must remind you that although I discussed steps 11 and 12, you are on steps 8, 9, and 10. You have your amends list, and on page 84, paragraph 2, you have the 4 and 4 of step 10 to use as you clean up the past. You will fall right out of the sky if you lose your willingness to do that work. You should get some of your amends done before moving into steps 11 and 12. I would like to close by reading the last paragraph on page 164. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then.